Here we go, another installment of the Facebook Live, the Joe Sikorra Show on Facebook Live. So nice to have you along here today. If you are just tuning in, welcome. You're the first, or the second, or the third. I don't know. I don't keep track. But I want to talk about what might be one of the most important topics for you to ever consider. Ever. How is that? I don't like to oversell anything, but this really is an important topic. What am I talking about? Forgiveness. What does it mean? What does forgiveness look like? Why is it so important? Not only does God say, you must forgive. In fact, he's very clear about forgiveness. In fact, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 16, in prayer, there is a connection between what you do and what God does. And he goes on to say, he said, you can't get forgiveness, for instance, without doing your part, which is forgiving others. But I would say that forgiveness is one of these themes that is actually so important that not only do we speak about it if you are a member of a church or religious organization, whether you're Jewish or Christian or Catholic Christian, whatever it is, but secularists, therapists, psychologists, a lot of people speak about forgiveness because it's absolutely crucial for you to understand if you haven't forgiven, right? For you to move forward, because a lack of forgiveness has been shown to lead to depression and isolation. And think about this. Think about your world. We're already living in a world where it seems we're so disconnected and isolated from each other. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think one, because we're so involved in social media, so we're always looking at our device and we're not looking face to face at each other. But we are isolated. But one of the things that you might be doing that is contributing to your isolation, forgive me, I have dust in my throat. I went running in the mountains today. It was a horrible, horrible winter day here in Southern California. It was about 74 and sunny. So I had to put on sunscreen. There you go. If you're hating me right now because you live in Minnesota or Ohio, forgive me. That's what we're talking about. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to practice forgiveness. But it is one of these things that even if I was a completely secular therapist, I would speak about forgiveness because it's so important for you to actually be able to forgive. But let me ask you a question, and I would love to hear from you today, especially on this topic. If you're struggling to forgive, if you're not sure if you are forgiven or not, text me your question. Wisconsin, 30s. Hey, Seuss, it's okay. You could come out and go running with me in the mountains here, like my brother did from Minnesota today. We went running in the mountains. Well, I ran, he walked, but it's beautiful. Anyway, you can forgive me, Jesus, right? That's what we're talking about. So anyway, but I would love to hear from you if you are struggling to forgive some aspect. Maybe something happened to you decades ago. Maybe you're not sure if you have forgiven or not. What would be some of the clues that you haven't been forgiven or you haven't forgiven someone? You know, what do you need to let go of? Who do you need to forgive? Do you need to find forgiveness? And here's another question. And again, if you want to type me your question about forgiveness, type it. Remember, this is a public forum, so other people can see what you're writing or asking. But if you do type it, and I'm on my game, and I'll try to be on my game, I will try to respond to your question real time. But I want you to consider, what does somebody else have to do? Just noodle this as we discuss this. What do you think someone else has to do for you to forgive? In other words, is it important if you say, hey, I forgive you, that they say, hey, I'm really sorry? Does that person even have to be alive? That's what we're going to talk about. But what does it mean to forgive? Some people talk about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I do that frequently, and I'll kind of give you my brief about what that is. Some people speak about acceptance versus forgiveness and what is the difference. But Jesus, you're saying, is not remembering why I was mad with someone a sign that I forgive that person? That's actually a great question. I would say, Jesus, that is probably a sign that you have forgiven. In fact, couples do this frequently, Jesus. I don't know if you're married or not or in a dating relationship, But successful marriages, and these are people, researchers who look at couples who are happily married over a long period of time. Forgiveness is one of the keys to actually happy marriage. And in fact, frequently, they don't say, hey, forgive me, I'm sorry, married 4 kids, there you go. But frequently, married couples who are successful just forget about wrongs that are done. There's a lot of things that you're going to do, that you're going to do, Jesus, that your wife is going to do. And if you spoke about all the hurts or all of the wounds, all of the slights, you would become consumed with it. So I would say, yes, it probably is an indication that you're forgiving and letting go and moving on, because you can really get stuck if you think you have to address all of the small things, all of the hurts and the wounds. So I'd say it's a very good sign for you and your marriage that you're not really remembering what you were fighting about. So good for you. I like that a lot. But if you have a question about forgiveness, or if you have forgiven, if you're not sure, if how to forgive, what does it mean? What would it mean for you to forgive? Please type in your question. And again, I'll do my very best to try to respond to it in real time. But again, I want to repeat this, that it's very clear that not only from a secular standpoint, as you know, I'm a Catholic and a therapist, but I read a lot of secular research and psychology and everything else, and you'd be surprised how much even secular researchers and therapists speak about forgiveness. It's not just a Christian concept. It is a Christian concept for sure, but it's so important and so necessary for you to forgive, because if you withhold forgiveness, your life becomes miserable. You build resentment, you build anger, you're prone to depression, you're prone to experiencing isolation. And again, God says, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, there is a connection between what you do in prayer and what God does. If you don't forgive, you're not going to experience God's forgiveness. If you don't forgive, you're more prone to experience anger, isolation, and depression. Your past, and here's why it's so important to actually understand if you have forgiven or not. Laura, you say, I know that I've forgiven because I pray for them and I don't feel any resentment or anger. Amen. You're absolutely right. And prayer, by the way, Laura, is one of the things to do to actually forgive. You may not ever have to have a conversation, Laura, with that person who hurt you, who wronged you, who sinned against you, whatever it is. You may never have to have a conversation. Sometimes it's actually not warranted or healthy. But if you pray for that person, what it means is that you're letting go of the anger, you're letting go of the resentment, you're letting go of the grudge, you're letting go of the hurt or the wound that you experienced. And there's no better way to actually let go of those negative emotions than to pray for somebody. Because when you pray for somebody, you're actually praying God's blessings on them. So there's no doubt about that even if you haven't forgiven, if you're in a process of forgiveness, that would be one of the things that you want to consider doing, which is to pray for them. But here's something kind of psychobabbly sounding. Jesus, you're asking, but how do I forgive someone that is not recognizing he or she hurt you? How do you handle that? That's a great question. Let me get to that right now. I was going to talk about that, but let me talk about it right now. Sometimes, if it's important for you to reconcile a relationship, Jesus, let's say your wife, you're married, you have four, or I don't know if you're married or not, but let's say you're married, and some of you who are listening aren't married, but your brother or your sister hurt you, and you live with them, right? By necessity or whatever reason, you have to spend a lot of time with them, or you're a business associate with somebody who's forgiven you, but they don't acknowledge it, they don't see. How do you actually forgive them? Can you forgive them without them acknowledging the hurt? Yes, is the short answer. Because they may never know that they hurt you. They might say to you, for instance, I didn't hurt you, or I didn't mean to hurt you. But if you feel as though that relationship must be reconciled, and there's the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness is, you hurt me, but I'm not going to hurt you back, right? And you can do that by praying for them. Obviously, you're wishing and praying blessings upon them. So that could be forgiveness. But if that person never acknowledges or recognizes that they've hurt you, can you still forgive them? Yes, absolutely. But if, as I said before, if you're in a relationship that must be maintained, you're married to them, right? Then you've got to go beyond just forgiveness and you've got to reconcile. Reconciliation is, hey, you hurt me. This relationship has been broken and we need to mend it. We've got to make this relationship so it works. So again, I think that it depends on the relationship. But if this person is a stranger, let's go back, Jesus, to say your father hurt you. He yelled at you, he abused you, he screamed at you, he neglected you, he did something like that. And now your dad is dead, right? I work with a lot of people. I know a lot of people who experience this. Can you speak to him about that? You could pray. You could speak to him through prayer. I think that's possible. Is it likely that you're going to hear from him where he says, yes, okay, I'm sorry I hurt you? No, it's not likely. Not often do we hear from beyond the grave. Sometimes it happens, but not so often. So can you forgive them? Absolutely. Those are the times that you must. How do you do that? Well, the forgiveness comes from maybe understanding what it is they did, what they did to you, how it affected you, why maybe they did that. Maybe there was some reason. Maybe they were acting out of their own pain or own hurt that they did that. So again, your forgiveness is more about you letting go of the anger or the resentment or the pain that they caused you, the wound. So absolutely, again, I'm a little bit long-winded on this one question. I hope I haven't lost you here in answering this question, Jesus, but absolutely, can you forgive if somebody doesn't acknowledge that they've hurt you? Yes. Those are the more difficult times to forgive, but that's probably even the more necessary time. Remember, the forgiveness really is more it's the gift that you give yourself. Sometimes we withhold forgiveness because you think, I'm not going to forgive this person, and you might think this, it might be in your brain unconsciously. You think, I'm not going to forgive this person because A, it means I'm giving them a pass, or I'm saying if I forgive them, or if I don't forgive them, hey, I'm hurt and I'm going to show you that I'm hurt by not forgiving you. But the truth is, when you withhold forgiveness, you hurt yourself more than anybody else because you are the one who's holding on to the resentment. Frequently, and I've seen this happen, people will say, I'm so angry with what my mother or my father or my friend did to me a month ago, a year ago, a decade ago. And then you go to have that conversation with that person and say, hey, you really hurt me. And they look at you like, what? What are you talking about? I don't even remember that. So again, they may have hurt you, but they don't even recognize or know that they hurt you. So again, the forgiveness is more the gift that you give to yourself, more than the gift that you give to somebody else. Hey, one of my lights just went out. Well, luckily, God's light is still coming in. If you can see me okay, we're still on here. So again, we're talking about forgiveness. And if you have a question about forgiveness, remember that this isn't a platform that is, I'm trying to turn on my light again, but it's not going to work. This isn't a private platform, but if you type your question, everybody else can see it. But I encourage you, if you have a question about forgiveness, if you have forgiven, is it appropriate to forgive? If you don't know if you've forgiven and you want to type it, I will try to respond to it. Thank you, Jesus. So why is it so important for you to forgive? Because the wounds that you experience as a child, the wounds that you experience as an adult, the wounds that you experienced last week, shape you, inform you. Now, if you were, let's say somebody deeply hurt you, wounded you, abused you in some way a decade ago, a year ago, can you grow from that experience? Yes, you can. Am I saying that it was good that you were abused or wounded? No, but you're going to be abused. You're going to be wounded in this life. That's just natural. So if you look at everything that happens as an opportunity, then you can grow from it. But let's say on one hand, you grow from that experience. You actually spend the time and you look and you reflect on how you were hurt. You reflect on how that wound shaped you, right? But if you forgive, then you can say, yes, I was really hurt by this, but I've learned resilience, I've learned forgiveness, I've learned how to become stronger, I've learned how to take care of myself. These are all positive things. But if that very same wound, whether it was a week ago, a year ago, or a decade ago, if you withhold forgiveness, you're not going to grow from that experience, that negative experience. You're only going to be holding on to the pain and the anger. And what are you going to learn? How do you grow out of pain and anger, or anger and resentment? You don't. So there's a very little growth opportunity. But if you forgive, then that you're really given the opportunity to move on. Again, there might be times in your life that you're withholding forgiveness. And again, not consciously. I think sometimes when you feel eaten up, or maybe you're struggling with depression, or you don't know why you're angry, or you're quick to jump on somebody. It can be because that you haven't forgiven somebody for something that seems like, wait a second, they didn't hurt me, but they're really successful and I'm not, and you're resentful of their success. Did they intentionally hurt you, wound you? No, but it could be a clue if you feel like you're holding on to anger or resentment that you haven't forgiven them for their success. Dorothy, you're asking, is there a difference between forgiving and giving it to God? I think that, well, let me answer it this way, Dorothy. I'm going to assume that you are a Christian, maybe a Catholic Christian or Christian. I think that as a Christian, when you forgive, God is involved in that. Just like in Matthew chapter 6, there's a connection between what you do and what God does. When you forgive others, you experience God's forgiveness. So there is definitely a connection with God when you forgive. But let's say you have no faith at all, right? Then I would say, or you don't acknowledge that God exists. Probably most of you listening, watching right now have some faith orientation. But even if you had no faith, then I'd say, are you giving it to God when you forgive? No, I would say that wouldn't be the case, but you're giving yourself a gift. You're giving yourself the gift of letting go of the anger and the resentment. Are you giving that other person a gift? Perhaps. Maybe, maybe not. Again, they might not acknowledge that they've actually hurt you. This is driving me crazy now that my light isn't working, so I'm going to try to fix it really fast. If it works, I'm a genius. If it doesn't, it didn't work. I guess I'm not a genius. Oh, well. I just thought I'd try it real time. So, again, I think that your intuition, your instincts, Dorothy, when you ask, is it given to God, is, yeah, you're probably offering your pain, giving your pain, connecting yourself to God, because it might be beyond you, and you're actually getting that help, that support, that strength that you need to forgive. So I think you're not just giving it to God, but you're entering into a relationship where you're giving to God and you're getting from God that strength and the grace necessary to forgive. So it's a great question. Again, if you have a question about forgiveness, is it appropriate? Are you withholding forgiveness? What does somebody else have to do for you to forgive? Type in your question. I will try to... I look fine without the light. Thank you. Sometimes I look better if it's just a little bit darker. So I'm going to leave the light on. Henceforth, off, I mean. So again, sometimes it's difficult to think that you're withholding forgiveness because, you're holding on to resentment or anger. The more beautiful sister, your more successful friend, you're more, harboring somebody else's goods, whatever it is. Yeah, that's a case of forgiveness where you have to let go of that resentment, let go of that pain, and actually forgive. So let me ask you this question, maybe you want to respond to this. How does withholding forgiveness serve you? Because if you're not forgiving, let's go ahead and assume that there's a reason for it, an understandable reason. I'm not going to say a good reason, but there's an understandable reason why you might be withholding forgiveness, because it serves you in some way. It's like anger. Anger is very powerful. Anger is very destructive. There's a great book called Anger Kills. So you don't want to go around your life angry, but anger actually serves because it gives you energy. For the most part, it gives you energy to fight. And there's times, perhaps, where that's an okay thing. You're being attacked, literally, physically, you're being attacked. You got to fight back. You've got to survive. You've got to run. That kind of anger is good. So sometimes you actually withhold forgiveness because if you forgive, almost automatically what it means is that you have to let go of the anger. And you're afraid if you let go of the anger, if you let go of the wall, then that leaves you more susceptible to being hurt again. So yeah, again, anger is that energy. It allows you to fight back. But it does actually ultimately destroy you. Some people speak about forgiveness is like grieving. There's a wonderful book written by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, maybe you've written it, on death and dying, but it talks about the stages of death and dying. And some people actually speak about, maybe this will be helpful for you, as forgiveness as being a process. Sometimes we think forgiveness is, okay, I forgive you. Maybe it's important to say those words, but I would say don't think it's just about saying words. Forgiveness is really a process, just like in death and dying. You might experience, first of all, anger, right? You're hurt. Can you forgive when you're angry? No, but that's part of the process, to recognize, to acknowledge your anger. But the anger, again, maybe served a purpose to protect you. You've been hurt. That anger has given you the energy to keep yourself safe. Okay, you can acknowledge the anger. It's not bad. It's not evil. It just is. You just don't want to stay angry. Denial, right? Again, it's like, I can't believe they hurt me. I can't do this. How is my life going on? Bargaining. Okay, if you do this, then I will forgive you. Depression. Oh, I can't believe I've been hurt. I've been wounded. I'm a victim. Acceptance. Yes, this happened. I can accept that it happened. But I no longer have to live as a victim, right? You don't have to accept that. You become powerful by forgiving. You're no longer a victim when you forgive, so you move forward. So again, anger as a process, I think, is really important. Anger or forgiveness as a gift to yourself is really important. Remember, you can learn and grow through the process of forgiveness, because what is involved when you forgive in that process of forgiveness? Somebody hurt you. You're going back, you're looking, you're understanding what happened, not just how you were hurt, but what they did and why, and you're trying to understand how it reflects or molds or shapes your thoughts, your behaviors today. All of these things are really important. But you do that, right? You're becoming multidimensional. You're becoming more depth and understanding your life and your reactions. So you can grow through this process. You go back, you seek to understand what happened, and maybe even your role if you were hurt, right? If you're going to forgive, if you're going to look at at the forgiveness, the process of forgiveness completely, then you might want to understand, what role did you play in you getting hurt? Now, I'm not blaming you as the victim, right? But usually we all take part in what happens to our life. So if you're in a fight with your spouse, say, and he or she says some really awful things to you, and you go, wow, that's really awful, and you're considering, do I have to forgive this person or not? One of the things that you might want to do is ask yourself and to look and say, okay, what did I do? How did I contribute to this fight? So when you can enter into this process as something that's more mutual, that you need to forgive each other, you need to extend love and kindness and mercy and grace in this relationship, then again, it's an opportunity for the two of you to come closer together. So when you understand your role in it, it's very important. Forgiveness is very empowering too. When you are a victim, when you have been hurt, you might think about forgiveness. But part of what might prevent you or keep you from offering forgiveness is you might say to yourself, no, that just keeps me in this weak position. Oh, I forgive you. Everything's okay. That's not it at all. Remember Jesus up on the cross. Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That was not easy. But that was an amazing act, an amazing, courageous act to do. So you really become the hero of your story when you forgive. The other reason why, and I've got so much to say and so little time, but again, we might have a little time. If you have a question about forgiveness or how do you forgive or where you're stuck with forgiveness, I'll try to respond to that if I can. But here's the other reason why you really want to look at your life and ask yourself, okay, where haven't I forgiven? And again, why would you have to do that? Well, if you think that you're an angry person or holding on to resentment or anxious or on edge, it could be a clue that there's some act, some person that needs, where you need to offer forgiveness in your life. But when you forgive, you contribute to the lives of other people. You become more capable of contributing positively to the lives of others. Remember, if you withhold forgiveness, you might have anger, right? There's a great deal of energy. You might feel, well, this anger is good because now I'm fighting for this cause and I'm going to use this anger to protect other people. Okay, but are you going to protect everybody from being hurt? Impossible. But when somebody else has been hurt, how is your anger actually going to contribute to their healing? Your anger isn't going to contribute to anybody's healing anymore. And that's what you're really called to do, is to be that instrument of healing for other people. So forgiveness is a very action-oriented thing. There's nothing passive about forgiving. Forgiveness is very active. And the resentment builds without forgiveness. So again, if you want your life to be joyful, if you really want to experience the joy, the love that God is asking you to live, to experience in this lifetime, then you really have to look at your life and say, okay, where am I withholding forgiveness? Remember, forgiveness is a difficult journey. Forgiveness isn't necessarily about one conversation. It's not about a phrase just saying, I forgive you. Forgiveness is a journey. When you say that you can't forgive, I would say what it means is you're choosing not to take that journey. Choose to take that journey. Choose to be on that path to forgive, to love, to let go, because that journey is going to take you to a new and healthier and more wonderful place. Release the anger that you feel. Remember, the anger that you feel is probably a clue that you need to forgive someone, some action or something like that. It's okay to be angry. Again, it's just a feeling. It's just an emotion, you could say. Acknowledge it, but then let it go, right? Release it. Refocus that. I would say this, that God gave us two brains. I'm oversimplifying here a little bit. I know you're thinking it's like two brains. As far as I know, I got one. He gave you a feeling brain, and he gave you a thinking brain. If you're withholding forgiveness, you're living in that feeling, resentment, anger, emotional brain. But if you step back and say, okay, God, you gave me this thinking brain for a reason. Let me go back. Let me analyze my life. Let me look at the decisions that I have made, how I have responded to being hurt. You know, have you been forgiven? Just ask yourself the question. If you are a Christian, right, you have been forgiven. absolutely, positively. Remember the death on the cross, right? That was the act that God offered for the forgiveness of sins. But you have been forgiven by other people. You have hurt others. You've probably experienced forgiveness. It is your job. It is your right. It is your responsibility. It is the greatest gift that you could offer yourself, which is to forgive. If you need inspiration, read a book, read scripture, read about the saints, think about Jesus, think about Martin Luther King, Viktor Frankl, any of those heroes who have actually experienced forgiveness, who have offered forgiveness. And because they have done that, they have been set free from the anger, from the resentment, from the jealousy, from the rage. Who do you need to forgive today? Reflect, then act. I will meet you back on the road. And remember, always forward.